Good evening and welcome to Straight Talk. This is Eugene Chan, and our guest tonight is Mr. Lawrence Lee, who is the chairman of the Financial Services Development Council. The FSDC advises our government on all matters relating to financial matters so that Hong Kong can be a successful international financial center. Mr. Lawrence Lee is a barrister by profession, and he's a senior counsel. He focuses on banking, commercial, company, and securities law. Tonight, we would like to find out if Hong Kong can maintain our competitive advantage as an international financial center. Lawrence, welcome to our show.
Eugene?
The term financial services is a commonly used term that we hear in daily use, but many of us do not know exactly what it refers to. You can probably give us a whole lecture on financial services. Mm-hmm. However, if you can do it for us in a nutshell, say in a couple of minutes, mm-hmm. to tell us what it actually encompasses.
Sure. Finance is really not magic. It's not that difficult to understand. At a macro level, I would say it's like blood circulation to the body. You need it. Mm-hmm. It by itself doesn't really do very much. You need muscle, you need teeth,
mm-hmm.
you need dentists,
yes.
To actually do things. But behind it, there's blood circulation. It enables the different organs of the economy to function. At a micro level, finance is actually just about everything we do every day. We make a living, we make savings, we want to put the capital to use. You might invest in stocks, you might buy insurance, you might buy some bonds. It's safe. Even something as simple as you putting deposits in a bank is finance. So it's really everyday life.
So basically everything, isn't it? In a way?
We like to think that finance helps everything happen.
Okay. Right. With our national 14th five-year plan that's approved on the 31st or on the 11th of March 2021, Hong Kong has been given a unique role in the strengthening and development of the financial service. Is this because we are really strong in that, or this is the only thing that we can do? Sorry to be very blunt.
It's a little bit of both. There's no doubt that we are very strong in it, both internationally and in terms of our unique position within China. We are an international financial center on par with London and New York. But even more unique to that is that we are the only international financial center of China. Mm-hmm. So you imagine an economy that's growing so fast, it will need a lot of blood. It will need a lot of circulation. And we're in a unique position to provide that.
Mm-hmm. So we often refer to as a gateway to the mainland or between the bridge between the East and the West. You mentioned about our uniqueness. What's so unique about Hong Kong's financial services?
It's unique in several ways. Mm-hmm. First, it's unique in that it is international. Finance, again, like blood, it goes around everywhere. Mm-hmm. It's like any liquid. You can't stop it. It will find ways to go into what it believes to be the best opportunities. Mm-hmm. So the only way to do finance is to have scale.
Right.
And you can't really have scale without being part of the international pool. But being part of the international pool brings in, shall we say, infection, mm-hmm. or at least the potential for infection.
Right.
So in order to manage the international flow, in order to participate in the international financial arena, you actually need a especially strong immunity system. You need mechanisms to get rid of some risk, get rid of some germs. And that comes from several things. It comes from experience. Mm-hmm. It comes from institutional design.
Right.
And it comes from the rule of law.
Right.
And all those things put Hong Kong in a special position in providing finance to the larger economy that is China.
So is that the reason why all the international firms would like to have their base in Hong Kong, or investors putting money in Hong Kong as a bridge over to China?
Well, it's certainly one of the biggest reasons why we are international. We have a lot of expatriate firms, foreign firms here in Hong Kong. We have a lot of mainland domestic firms in Hong Kong. But let's not forget, that's also because of other advantages and other uniqueness of Hong Kong that make us attractive. Mm-hmm. We have international schools. We have a culture that's very open to both East and West. We have a workforce that's able to adapt, etc. So it's all these confluence of factors that come together that make us Hong Kong and make us strong.
So in a way, is what we have said earlier, the sort of the competitive advantage, relative competitive advantage, isn't it?
Well, you can put it as competitive advantages. I always thought the term or the concept of competitive advantage a little bit confrontational and also a little bit too business-like.
Right.
I like to think of it as just unique and everything that is Hong Kong.
Okay. So as you know, our government, we have four main pillars of industries, which makes up 60% of our GDP. That has financial services, trading and logistics, professional services, and tourism. And I understand the financial services account for 20% of our GDP. And during the last 2 years, with the riots and with the COVID, we are relatively undisturbed. That is a very good news. But in your opinion, but on the other side of the coin, it's quite vulnerable. That means if anything goes wrong, Hong Kong will go down the drain. Do you agree?
No, actually. Let's focus on finance. I think there are two characteristics of finance that will put us in good stead. One is very scalable. You can take the same system, you can take the same critical mass and grow it as the economy and as opportunities abound come to Hong Kong. So there's a lot of potential there for even further growth. That's the positive side of finance. At the same time, there's a defensive side to finance, which is very resilient. As we have seen in the last couple of years, all the local challenges that present itself in Hong Kong don't actually affect Hong Kong as an international financial center that negatively, because it's very resilient. It's built in a way that depends not just in Hong Kong, but in a much larger base. So in many ways, this is the part of Hong Kong that is least vulnerable.
Right. Right. Lawrence, let's look at some objective ranking. In March 2021, the Global Financial Center Index has placed Hong Kong as number 4, having New York, London, and Shanghai. And mind you, in last September, we were actually on the 5th, with Tokyo as being the 4th, we are the 5th. And also, just a very recent and a recent survey by the IMD, Institute for Management Development, Switzerland-based, the World Competitiveness Index, we have dropped 2 notches to 7th, coming to the 5th last year. So look at all those figures, it's ups and down. I think we are being a target. So how can we, or actually, what can you do to help to attract more people come to Hong Kong and use our financial services? It's very competitive.
I'll answer your last question in a second, but let's talk about rankings.
Right.
I often think of rankings as like advising students on universities. I went to one, which when I went to, I think ranked number 2 in the US.
Right.
By now, it probably ranked number 4. But you know what? If you are in the top 10 in the world, or top 10 in a large country like the US or China, you're in a pretty good position.
Right.
And frankly, those who do rankings have a need to shuffle the rankings a little bit from time to time, ostensibly to refine their methodology, but also it's a bit boring if there's no movements in the ranking.
Oh, is that right?
So let's not get too hung up about exactly whether we're number 4 or number 5 or number 6. But these movements tell us something, because there's still some science to the rankings, and the movements tell us that we might be coming short on a particular measure.
Okay.
No center is perfect, and there will be not quite shortcomings, but there will be weaknesses in your strategy. Now, it may be that after some discussion, you will stick with the weakness. So, for example, for Hong Kong, our weakness comes also from our strength. We are a fantastic fundraising center. The stock exchanges scale from height to height. In our last quarter, the first quarter of this year, we have set a historic record in terms of fundraising. But at the same time, you can't deny that if you have such a strong fundraising engine, it's going to attract a lot of talent there. I often use the analogy of if you are a top-notch financier and you're given the choice between doing fairly traditional IPOs and something really innovative like another version of crypto, what would you pick? Honestly, the rational choice may well be to pick the traditional industry or traditional financial sector because it's steady, It's actually more than steady. It's growing fantastically. And you are assured probably 5 years of very good bonuses. Whereas if you go to do the new crypto, it's a bit more risky. You'll probably say, oh, could I have the crypto on my portfolio too? But I'm going to delegate it to someone under me to look after. So that weakness of us being too good at one thing and therefore comparatively spending less time on the others, it's the boom and the bane. You can't have it both ways.
Right, Lawrence, thank you for the reassurance. Mind you, we used to be number 3 as well. So basically, I can see a downward trend. And good that you mentioned the talent. We will talk about that after the break. Let's come back. Welcome back, and we have been talking to Lawrence Lee, who is the chairman of the Financial Services Development Council. And in the first part of the show, we talked about what financial services are, basically a lot of things, and what are our uniqueness and what are the challenges. And we touched on the fact on talent. As you know, talent means everything because we need the manpower to work in the industry. So do we have the right and adequate talent in Hong Kong to make it successful, or is it a system?
It's both talent and system, but let's focus on talent. I owe you an answer on talent. There are essentially 3 things to worry about talent. For an international financial center like us, first aspect is, are we attracting outside talent enough? And on that front, we're probably doing okay. COVID, it's standing a bit in the way, but compared with others, we're doing really well.
Because our borders are closed.
The second aspect of it is, obviously, we want to take care of local talent too. And that's a particular challenge for us because Hong Kong is essentially doing cross-border business 99% of the time. And so how do we make sure that our local talent understands what's happening north of the border and also internationally? That's a bit of a challenge, but we have succeeded really well and we continue to work on that. The third aspect of talent to worry about is the new subsectors within finance. Right now, the 2 subsectors that are crying out for talent everywhere is Fintech and green finance. And both of them have an international shortage of talent. In many ways, we'll be able to gain a little bit of an advantage if we are able to groom more talent locally on Fintech and green finance, and in both respects, we have some unique advantages. On Fintech, we have the advantage of north of the border, there's a huge pool of tech talent that we can combine with our Fin expertise and try to do something with it. Green finance is essentially opportunities.
Right. Lawrence, you mentioned earlier about our rankings. It's just relative. But being number 4 and not as high as New York, London, or Shanghai, do we have problems, or how are we going to attract those talents from overseas to Fintech and green finance?
Interesting question. I remember when I first came out of university, a partner in my firm put it to me this way. He said, Lawrence, it's not where you are that makes you interesting. It's your rate of climb. Okay. And in that sense, I care less about whether I'm number 3 or number 4. I care more about whether Hong Kong is growing. For as long as we are growing, so as long as there are opportunities, you will attract talent.
Right. In that context, I'll ask you another thing that I read in an article when I'm preparing meeting you today. There's some are saying that because of the misinterpretation of our national security legislation, which you said earlier, rule of law and the independence of judiciary is our core. Some of our locals may be moving away. So how can we still attract talents from overseas when people worry about that fundamental principle?
Well, first, I don't quite agree that people, particularly financiers, are worried about that. Okay. Not at all. We have done both formal and informal feedback gathering sessions. We've done surveys. For as long as finance, which probably is most sensitive to rule of law in the short term of all businesses, we're actually not seeing particular concern about rule of law. the bit about NSL that a lot of people have talked about is actually not related to rule of law. It's the fact that NSL puts on the table the possibility of legal, by legal I mean conflicts of law legal, between our domestic and China's need to protect itself and the US increasing use of sanctions as one way for them to do, their international relations. And unfortunately, this has little to do with the rule of law. If anything, speaking as a lawyer, it has more to do with the law being deployed by competing countries.
Okay, right. We have mentioned the word many times in the interview. So it looks like if we have our say, how would you want the central government to support Hong Kong further?
I wouldn't even quite put it as supporting Hong Kong. If I have my say, I would point resolutely to how Hong Kong has a lot to contribute to the national economy. I earlier mentioned dual circulation.
Yes.
As China goes increasingly onto a dual circulation strategy that needs both the domestic circulation and the international circulation of the economy, Hong Kong can take our previous advantage in the international side of things and grow that into also a domestic advantage or a domestic experience. And that's really quite exciting.
Right. Apart from that, are you worried about we all kind of read the news basically every day that there are tensions between the Sino and US relations at the moment. Are you worried Hong Kong may get caught in the crossfire, especially in the financial services?
If you mean worry, whether there's something that we think about, yes, that's something that I do think about. But at the same time, you and I will know this saying, it will show our age, only the paranoid survives.
Right.
And financiers do that all day. They worry about everything possible because they all need to be factored in. And the changing relations between the US and China, and increasingly US is trying to pursue a multilateral strategy of its own, and China is pursuing a multilateral strategy of also its own. Those two will probably put us in a changing world. And in that sense, actually, both the upside and the downside to Hong Kong come from the same thing. The upside comes from the fact that this international relation, this geopolitical context is changing, and we have a lot to offer in this changing context. But at the same time, because of the changing context, there is going to be crossfire. I'm not going to deny that. And we therefore need to pursue the method of only the paranoid survives.
Okay.
We think about the crossfire every day, and we avoid being caught in the crossfire. But at the same time, it's exactly because of the occasional crossfire that we have a lot to offer.
Right. To be more specific, the US has ended their preferential economic treatment of Hong Kong. And there's even talk of the Washington, I read from an article, that they could cut Hong Kong off from the US dollar payment system. I mean, this is quite controversial. I mean, so obviously this is going to affect the financial sector. Do you think that's a reality?
Well, the first one, Hong Kong as a favored trading partner, in many ways doesn't actually affect finance that much. Hong Kong really hasn't been in real goods trade, other than there's a transition, there's an export-import intermediary for a very long time. So that's not the bit that really keep us up at night. To the financial community, it's probably things like the second possibility that you mentioned.
Yes.
But at the same time, those are black swans. Now, I don't want to say black swans don't happen. Experience tells us that black swans, we need to worry about them. But let's also pause and think about the scenario described. That's wouldn't be just directed at Hong Kong. That would essentially be something like the US saying, I want to redefine the international payment system. That's going to be a huge change. If things like that happen, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not going to say it never will. Chances are extremely slim. But even if the extremely slim chance black swan happens, Hong Kong will be in a good position to deal with it. Because with that sort of change, and nonetheless recognizing that China is the number 2 economy in the world, by far, number 3, 4, 5, 6 are very, very far behind. the need for international payments and international finance will not go away. So if that's not being filled by the existing US dollar-based system, there has to be a new system. And if there has to be a new system, we can only have an even larger role.
That's very reassuring, Lawrence. Right, so we've been talking about the financial sector. We are doing well, and I've checked that. It employs about 7% of the population for 20% of GDP. So this group of people must be very efficient, and they must be doing well. But how about the rest of Hong Kong? I mean, if the rest of Hong Kong aren't in that advantageous position, a favorable position, what are we going to do? How can we benefit from this uniqueness of Hong Kong? What do you think?
Eugene, you asked a very, very good question. That probably is the hardest question for a body like the FSDC and for the financial services community. I earlier mentioned about local talent. I mentioned that we essentially, 99% of the business we do is cross-border. And so first and foremost, our international talent and our mainland talent will increasingly be important to the development of finance. Now, the question then is, how do we help the local population, our local talent, also thrive in this environment, and then also to radiate out the benefit of finance onto the larger local economy? I must confess, I don't have a great answer. There is the traditional answer of trickle down, but I think economists will tell you there are limitations to the trickle down. There is, of course, the always good answer of education and training. We need to continue to pursue that. But probably, I think the future answer lies in us also adapting our financial services, not just to sales, not just to selling IPOs, so on, but also more to mid and back office functions, things like asset management, things like risk management. Right. And those things will stand a longer local advantage. And we will be able to keep more jobs and more lines of job in Hong Kong.
Well, I'm going to ask you the last question before the show ends. As you know, FSCC is an advisory body advising government. And I'm sure all our viewers will be very assured when listening to your interview tonight that everything is doing well. But, I mean, I've seen many advisory committees. What if the government or other the regulators such as the Monetary Authority, the Exchange, the Insurance Authority, MPFA, and SFC, what if they don't listen to you? Or actually, who decides the policy until they're in short?
Well, the short answer is they do listen to us. We were,
Great.
After all, created by the government exactly to advise. So it would be a bit silly if they don't listen to us.
Right. Okay, I think that's maybe all that we have time for tonight. And we have covered a lot of ground, Lawrence. And thank you for a very interesting discussion.
Pleasure.
And I hope the viewers is more assured that Hong Kong will be able to, because with the uniqueness, we'll be able to stand well as an international financial center. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. And have a good week and good night.